Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Graves Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be continuing with our film review series where we're going to be continuing with our look at different Disney films, and we're looking today at none other than Dumbo from 1941. Now obviously people missed out last week because I was on holiday, but it was the first holiday I've taken since starting YouTube, in 21 months. So I think I'm entitled to a bit of holiday. I've got a little bit of a tan and stuff, as you can probably notice. And yeah, so obviously missed it and stuff. Also just come back from a cold as well. So if I'm a little bit off, then apologies for that. But yeah, so without further ado, we're going to kind of dive into looking at Dumbo. But before we do that, don't forget obviously to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, every subscription really helps me out a lot, and obviously share with your friends as well if you have any friends. I assume you must have some friends by now. Maybe like go on different, like, I don't know, just go out with someone, just have a life, like meet people. Yeah, then you can be like, hey, there's this guy who does great film reviews and stuff, you should really check him out. He's really cute as well. But anyway, yeah, so subscribe, share with people, and obviously hit the like button as well, and also as well hit the bell button as well, so it keeps you notified when I have new videos coming out. But they are out every Sunday apart from last Sunday. But anyway, so without further ado, let's dive straight into Dumbo. So as always, when we're doing our film reviews, we're going to have 6 different sections, right? So section 1 is the story of the story. Section 2 is the story of the creator. Section 3 is the story of the studio. Section 4 is the themes and history. Section 5 is the legacy. And section 6 is any notable lines and notable effects within the film. So now we're going to dive straight into the story of the story. And with that, we can see that Dumbo was first of all a children's book called Dumbo the Flying Elephant. And this was written by Helen Aberson Meyer and her husband Harold Pearl. Now the story by and large sticks a lot to what the original story was, but we'll talk about some of the differences a little bit later. But now we're going to dive straight into the plot of the actual thing. So if you haven't seen it already, spoiler alert, this is the channel that loves spoiler alerts, right? We love spoilers. So if you're not on that wave, go find a different channel and stuff. But yeah, or just skip a little bit, but watch the thing anyway, right? So first of all, the story starts out in a circus in Florida. So there's white storks that are bringing babies to the different animals. And, so you have Mrs. Jumbo, and she's looking about being like, where's my baby at, right? Like kind of everyone else is getting babies, where's mine? And eventually she ends up getting it like the next day. So there's Mr. Stork. I don't know why he's called Mr. Stork. They couldn't have come up with more imaginative name. Like there must be loads of different storks. I don't know why he's Mr. whatever. But anyway, the point being, Mr. Stork comes, he brings the baby, and Mrs. Jumbo, and all the other elephants are really infused by him. So I think that he's really, really cute, and she calls him Jumbo Jr. However, when his big ears are revealed, the other elephants very rudely call him Dumbo, right? So obviously she's very protective of him and stuff, and very caring towards him. And actually we can see that in the next scene, there ends up being a bunch of like boys who come to the circus, right? And they're jeering at him, they're kind of like mocking his big ears, and she gets really, really angry, right? And she flies into a rage, and the circus people end up restraining her. They end up taking a Dumbo away, and they end up locking her up in like a kind of like cage, basically, with the label of Mad Elephant. So the other elephants kind of turn on Dumbo. They kind of ostracize him because they blame him for like his mum getting locked up, right? But Timothy the mouse ends up coming through, and he basically, first of all, like, it's that classic thing of like elephants being scared of mice. So he kind of winds them up and like kind of scares them and stuff. But then obviously Dumbo is also scared because he's a mouse, right? So eventually he ends up kind of like overcoming this fear, and like, Timothy kind of shows that he's a good guy and stuff. And Timothy goes, right, I'm going to help you to become famous. Yeah, I'm going to like become famous together, right? So what Timothy then does is he whispers into the ears of the ringmaster and says that Dumbo is going to be the show's climax, right? So the next day, all the elephants in, or not a human pyramid, but an elephant pyramid as such. And the idea is that Dumbo is going to run up this thing, and he's going to climb to the top and wave his little flag. However, because of his ears, yeah, he ends up tripping over these, right? And ends up causing a whole lot of havoc, and the elephants end up falling over each other and end up bringing down the entire tent, and it's just a complete disaster. So as a result of this, the circus decides to make Dumbo a clown, and the other elephants decide that he's no longer an elephant. So obviously Dumbo is very depressed by this, he's very sad, he doesn't have his mother with him, and obviously he's been made into a clown. So Timothy goes and takes him to his mother, and this is where the classic baby mind scene happens. If you've not seen it already, it's very much a kind of a real tearjerker. If you watch it and don't end up crying, or at least a tear wells up, you have no soul. It's official, you're a vampire, you have no soul, right? But anyway, he comes back from seeing his mother, and the clowns, they're all there, and they go off to ask the big boss for a raise. We'll talk about that a little bit later, right? But while they're doing that, they end up knocking over a bottle of champagne in the drinking water, right? So Dumbo comes back, starts drinking the water, and ends up getting really drunk from that. And that's when he starts seeing pink elephants. So pink elephants back in those days was innuendo for you're just drunk and you're just seeing things, right? So you have that kind of pink elephant sequence, pink elephants on parade, and eventually they end up waking up the next morning, and there's a bunch of crows around them, right? They're all kind of mocking them, and they're like, what, why are these crows here? What are you saying? Why, just leave me alone, right? And they look down and they realize that they're up in a tree, and they fall down, but eventually they're like, hold on, how did we end up in that tree in the first place, yeah? And one of the crows jokingly kind of says, oh, maybe you flew up there. And Timothy goes, right, maybe we did fly up there. Dumbo, those ears, that's the reason, so those ears are like wings. That's how you've been able to get up that tree. We flew up there, right? And of course, the crows mock him for this. But Timothy then tells Dumbo's life story to them. They end up being very sad and very sympathetic. So they give him a magic feather, to help him to fly. And they push him off a cliff, and lo and behold, he flies, right? So the next day at the circus, Dumbo is going to jump out of the window of a many high a story building, and as he does that, he has the magic feather with him, so that should help him to fly. However, the magic feather ends up slipping away from him, and as he's falling, there's this big panic. Is he going to be able to fly? Is he not going to be able to fly? But of course, just like how he did before to get up in that tree, he flew, right? And he gets his vengeance on the clowns, he gets his vengeance on the other elephants and stuff, and then the film ends happily ever after. He ends up becoming a famous Hollywood star. Timothy the mouse ends up becoming his agent, and then his mother ends up having her own private train carriage and stuff, and they all go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. So that's the story of the story. Now let's move on to the story of the creator. So Helen Abson-Meyer, obviously she was the original author of the story, and she was a social worker in New York City at the time. And she obviously worked with lots of different children, and as a result of that, she ended up writing many different children's books. However, unfortunately, Dumbo was the only one that ended up getting published, and also she didn't really get that much money from it, right? So when it was sold to Disney, it says in the history of it that she may have got, right? I'm very dubious about that, may have got, right? So she may have got $1,000, some royalties, and some credit rights for the thing, right? So not an awful lot considering how big the film would end up being, but that's kind of the sad things about the story of the creator at the times, that people often don't end up getting the credit that they really deserve. So in terms of how it got brought to Walt Disney's attention, right? In late 1939, Kay Kamen, who was the head of merchandise licensing for Disney, right? Kay ended up bringing it forward to Disney, and Disney was just blown away by the story. It was such a just beautiful story. It was so simple and stuff, right? And they was like, right, we have to make this into a film. However, originally it was just going to be a short film, but they decided to do the story justice. They were going to make it a feature-length film. And they got the same writers who they had in Fantasia. So this is Dick Humer and Joe Grant. He got them to write the script for it. Now, how they wrote the script for it was very, very unusual, right? So I, as a fellow script writer, I was also very interested by this, right? So they wrote a 102-page basically script with chapters in it, similar to a book. Now that's very, very unusual, right? Normally you wouldn't do that. But within that kind of 2 month period where they were writing this, right, they obviously stuck to the original story, but they added on a few things, as obviously people tend to do. So for instance, the Storks was an add-on because they wanted to kind of tell the story of like how Dumbo came to Miss Jumbo, like in a kind of like cute way and stuff. Also like the pink elephant sequence, that was also added in. Mrs. Jumbo was originally in the story called Mother Ella, but they decided to call her Mrs. Jumbo, like just to make it a bit more of like a comical name and stuff, and a bit more like elephant-like. And then also you had the character of Timothy the Mouse, right? So in the original story, it's a robin called Red, but they decided, like we said, because of the whole kind of dynamics with like, you know, mice and elephants and stuff, right? They decided it would kind of bring a different dimension to it if they had a thing where the elephant ends up befriending the mouse rather than being scared of it. And then also finally, the last add-on was with regard to the crows. So Disney originally wanted there to just be one crow, but this ended up morphing over time into 5 crows, right? So it's a gang of crows. I think that's actually the name for multiple crows. I think it's a gang, I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, so that kind of explains the story of the creator and all the kind of like creative processes that went into making it. So now talking about the story of the studio, right? So as we've said with some of our other videos talking about Disney, at the time, this is 1941, and this is when you had the Disney animator strike, right? So actually, like we said, like with regard to the clowns, when they go, "Oh, we're gonna ask the big boss for a raise," that's actually a parody, and that's kind of a dig at the people who are going on strike at that time for Disney, right? So yeah, so that's kind of having a dig at that. So you had the animator strike, you had the budget constraints because of like, you know, the overspending for Pinocchio and for Fantasia, and for like, you know, the limited revenue that they ended up getting in. So from the very beginning, they decided that Dumbo was going to be a really scaled back film, yeah, right? And also as well, on top of that, because they were working on Bambi, which was to come out the next year, they didn't have the capacity to put the best animators into the film. So that's why, you know, a lot of the kind of animation in it is quite sloppy. That's because they got the youngest, like least experienced animators on set, like to actually like kind of like do the drawing for us, right? And obviously it was like checked over and stuff, but there's lots of times when you look at it and go, you could have done with a little bit more work. So. But the whole idea of doing Dumbo was that from the very beginning, it was meant to be a short, low budget film, right? So all the kind of like extravagant costs that went into all the other ones, it was like, nope, we're scaling back all of that. We're just going to make a quick and a simple film. So while they may have cut costs with regard to the animation, they didn't cut costs with regard to the casting, right? So the casting for the film had many different people in it who would be in other Disney films as well, and also just in other things in general. Although it should be noted that, just like for many other Disney films in those days, all of the characters are uncredited, yeah, or rather all the actors are uncredited. So it's a bit, I don't know why they used to do that in those days, but anyway, maybe it kind of took away some of the magic of it, don't know, but anyway. So in terms of the voice actors, right, Dumbo, just like for Dopey in Snow White, and just like many other characters back in those days with Disney, he's mute. So there's no one to play his voice. He's just a mute, well, just a mute character, right? However, in terms of the voice of Timothy the Mouse, this is done by comedian Edward Brophy. So he's kind of like this wise guy, kind of like New York accent and stuff, right? So obviously gives that kind of like a dynamic, and like quite a lot of the dialogue is centered around like things that he says and stuff, and, you know, little quirks that of like how he kind of says things. Then in terms of the voice of the main elephant, so this is like the matriarch elephant, this is done by Verna Felton. So her voice is in lots of different Disney films, such as Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, and Jungle Book. And then also you have Sterling Holloway, who is the voice of Mr. Stork, and his voice is in Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Jungle Book, Aristocats, and also he is the voice of Winnie the Pooh, which is quite interesting. Obviously, Winnie the Pooh would come much later, but yeah, so he's the voice of Winnie the Pooh, and that's also Mr. Stork. And then, as we said with our video looking at Pinocchio, right, so you have Cliff Edwards, who's the voice of Jiminy Cricket, and he is the voice of Dandy Crow. And then finally, you have James Baskett, and he plays Fats Crow. So James Baskett, you see him on screen in Song of the South. We're going to cover that in a few weeks' time. But yeah, so he is the voice of Uncle Remus, right? Well, not just the voice, he is Uncle Remus, right? So that kind of explains the story of the studio. And now we're going to be talking about the themes and the history of Dumbo. So obviously the main overarching theme within this is motherly love. Yeah, you can really see this throughout the film. There's this kind of, you know, a really cute kind of like showing of like just how affectionate like the love between Miss Jumbo and Dumbo is, and also as well obviously the classic kind of like you know, baby mind scene really kind of helps to solidify that. Also as well, another archetypal kind of like theme that they have within this is the idea of the kind of the outsider, right? And he's ostracized by the rest of his society, but the very thing that makes him like ostracized in the first place is a thing that then eventually turns him into the hero of the story, right? So that's also kind of a kind of theme that you kind of say. I don't know exactly how you would put it into a particular theme, but yeah. Also as well, the fact that in terms of the history of it, right? I think that it was quite pivotal probably in the animal welfare kind of movement and like the animal rights movement, because obviously in those days people used to go to the circus, they'd see animals, and no one ever really thought about how the animals were treated. And so I think that Dumbo is quite an early depiction of how animals are mistreated oftentimes in circuses and just in general and stuff, right? So more likely than not, it had quite a big impact in how people viewed animals. And there's even a bit in the thing where like the clowns go, oh, you're going to hurt the little guy. And they go, no, like elephants ain't got no feelings. They're made out of rubber. It's like, obviously, like they're a sentient being. Obviously, they're going to have feelings and stuff. You can't just drop them out of a building and they're not going to feel anything, right? So there's that. And also as well, because it's the early 1940s, there's the obvious thing where there's racial stereotypes, right? So just, yeah. So first of all, obviously you have the fact that nearly all of the laborers in the circus are African American. You don't really see their faces much, but the song that they have when they're singing about like their work and stuff is they work all day, work all night, and then like, you know, they get their money and they basically spend it on just stupid things like drink or whatever, right? And then there's the line within that song of, grab that rope, Harry. I mean, it can't get any more on the nose than that, can it? It's just very, oh my god, like that could never be done nowadays. That nothing like that could ever have. You know, what? Like, how is that an acceptable thing to write? Who wrote that? That's just what. Anyway, so you have that, and obviously also the Crows is straight out of a black and white minstrel show, right? So, you know, Dandy Crow, who's like the main crow, like we said, his original name in it was going to be Jim Crow. So Jim Crow is obviously the you know, all the different like kind of like racial segregation laws that they had in America, but Jim Crow was a character, or was originally a character, yeah, a fictional character from the black and white minstrel shows that they had, yeah, where white people would dress up as black people and imitate them and basically take the mick out of them, right? So that was, it's very on the nose, and also while it's good in a way that 4 of the 5 crows are voiced by black actors, Dandy Crow, like we said, is voiced by Cliff Edwards, who's a white guy. So it's a white guy pretending to be black and imitating how black people in the South like to speak and stuff, right? So it's very, yeah, it's very just a product of its time, let's just say, right? And this is where it kind of ties into when we talk about the legacy now, right? So I can kind of see why Tim Burton, yeah, when he did a remake of it in 2019, left all of that other stuff out, right? Because it's very just, wow, yeah, it's unnecessary. It doesn't add anything. Well, you know what, actually, the Crows, there's some, Dandy Crow should have just been black, right? Okay, that might have ironed some things out, because it's a nice song that they do, and they're kind of funny characters and stuff, yeah, but it's just too on the nose, like, just no. And I can kind of see also why Disney Plus, they have Dumbo still, but it's restricted to people who are over the age of 7, and it comes with a warning of like racial insensitivity and stuff. Because even as like a little kid, you watch it and go, this is just not okay in the 21st century. It's just what. But in spite of all that stuff, the film was a roaring success. Like we said in our other videos, Dumbo is the film which rescued the Disney Corporation, right? Because of all the overspending that they had for Pinocchio and for Fantasia, this is the thing that really helped like to keep the company going, because it was so low budget and yet also at the same time so profitable in spite of everything that was going on in the world at that time, like World War II, etc., etc. So Dumbo, it only cost $950,000 to make. You know, like when you convert this to 2021 money, this is, I believe, 17.5 million or something thereabouts, right? But in terms of the box office, this is just for the US and Canada. In terms of the box office there, it was 1.3 million, which when converted to 2021 dollars, that ends up being $29.5 million, right? So it was a roaring success, right? Great success. People loved it. It was just a great kind of story. And it also went on to win an Academy Award and was nominated for another. So the Academy Award that it won was for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture. And the Academy Award that it was nominated for was for Best Original Song. And obviously this is Baby Mine, right? So again, if you watch it and you don't end up tearing up, you have no soul. So that kind of explains the kind of legacy of it, right? So now we're going to be looking at the notable lines and any kind of notable effects within this. So first we'll talk about the kind of notable effects, right? So in terms of the notable effects, the animation is not that great. In particular, if you look at some of how like the other animals are shown, especially what comes to mind is like the tigers. The quality on that is really shocking. I don't know how that was kind of like okayed and stuff, but I suppose because it was just in a rush, they were like, whatever, the tigers are kind of a minor thing anyway. So at certain points, yeah, the animation is really sloppy, but it's quite a unique film with regard to Disney because they used watercolors for like the paint, and the only time when Disney has used that in terms of that I'm aware of is for Snow White, and many decades later for Lilo and Stitch, because Lilo and Stitch, the creators of that for some reason wanted to pay homage to Dumbo. They wanted to have it in watercolors as well. Don't really know why, but anyway, that's why I did that. And also in terms of like how they did the animation, again, it was very like kind of like low budget, so they reused a lot of like the cells that they had, but they did manage to bring in animals into the studio, yeah, to see like how the animals looked and also like how like the animals moved and stuff, yeah. So it is quite realistic in many ways, like kind of like, so it's not terrible and stuff, right? It's quite good. And then obviously in terms of notable lines, right, they have this.
A happy birthday, a dear, a dear, a dear me, what's his name?
Dumbo the Great! Uh-oh, the Great what?
And then they also have this as well.
Waiting for a climax. You are now getting that climax. What are you boys doing down here anyway?
What are we doing down here? Well, hear him talk.
So I hope that you really enjoyed that video. It was a great film to watch. If you haven't seen it already, it's an absolute must watch. And obviously the next one that we're going to be looking at is Bambi. So definitely stay tuned for that for next week. And to make sure that you don't end up missing that, don't forget to obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and even if you have subscribed, don't forget obviously to hit the bell button so you stay notified. We do videos every Sunday at 5 p.m. Like GMT time. So if a video doesn't come up in your feed, that's because you're not notified. So hit the bell button and you will stay notified. And yeah, in the meantime, have a great day and bye.